Well, man, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thanks for having me come and talk with you. This is
Yeah,
great.
you bet. You bet. And before we get into your story,
Sure.
we're getting on the 4-year anniversary of this pandemic. How did you get through the pandemic and how did it change you?
I'm one of the rare people who probably my life got a little better during that COVID time. I
Yeah.
say that because my, in this case, only remaining child of two actually kind of backed up from living in Virginia and came back to live in this neighborhood here with his wife. So they came back. We were seeing them, if we were lucky, once a month or every 6 weeks or whatever it really was. And now it's daily. So yeah, that changed things quite a lot. And um, yeah, I mean, I there really wasn't a big downside to it. It affected me just a little bit because I was going to actually publish a book that I put out, which we'll talk about. I was going to put it out at the beginning of the year, and then COVID came, and I thought, no one's thinking about anybody's book that hard, I don't think,
Yeah.
especially from a first time author. So it's like, there's so much news, so to speak, that I thought this doesn't make sense at all. So I waited about 5 months to put it out. So I waited till maybe May or so.
So we will get into the book, but before we do that, I want to get a good handle on what you do on a daily basis. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders. It's career day, and one of the
Uh-huh.
kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How
That's
do
a
you
good way
answer
to
that
do that.
child?
I like the way you set that up. I am both an author and a podcast host. That's what I do. I'm retired from my job. I was a creative guy making all kinds of ads and TV spots and things for 40 years. I retired almost 10 years ago. And since that time have been working on, and third graders probably wouldn't understand domestic violence very much, but I focused on that. So eventually the book came. And then when the book was out in all forms, including audio book, which I narrated, then I thought, well, I still want to do something besides give an occasional speech. So I thought, well, maybe I'll try this podcasting thing. So I've been doing that now for 3 years.
Excellent. So let's get before we get into your book and get into your podcast,
Sure, sure.
what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream?
I think that I wanted to be some kind of an artist,
Yeah.
some kind of a guy that not so much a Norman Rockwell, who I eventually met, by the way,
Oh, wow.
but I like to draw all the time. I was always drawing. My father was a jet fighter pilot, so most people would think, "Wow, why didn't you want to do that?" And I think even at an early age, I thought, well, it'd be kind of fun until you put it into the ground, which I figured I probably would. So it's one thing to wreck your bike, it's nothing to wreck your jet. So
Yeah.
I was just drawn to being a creative guy and drawing comic books, and one thing led to another, and eventually art school and graphic design shop, and then advertising, and then writing and stuff. And just so it's mostly been creative.
My dad was a car salesman, and I think he sold a car to Thomas Hart Benton at one point, who was local here, and talked
That's
about how he had just the entire trunk was full of little bottles of whiskey, and he
uh,
paid for the car in cash. He was a real eccentric, but his stuff's
uh,
all around here because he's local. So you met Norman Rockwell.
I did. Yes, in 1972. That summer, I was 21 most of that summer, and I picked up a book that was called My Adventures as an Illustrator, an autobiography by Norman Rockwell. And had seen his I'd seen his paintings on the front of Boys Life magazine, Saturday Evening Post. Every time you go in to get your hair cut, there'd be Saturday Evening Posts sitting all over the place. And I kept thinking, man, there's something about the style and the storytelling and all, and I thought was great. So I didn't think I'll go meet this guy, but I was kind of drawn to what he was able to do. He can make it realistic, but still a painting. And so I got this book, I read it fast, and this is the summer 72. And I thought, oh my God, this guy's like 74 or 5 years old. He could die at any minute if he's even alive. You couldn't Google him in 72.
Yeah, right.
So I did some sniffing around and wrote some letters to some people and found out he's living in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And I picked a Saturday, 3 a.m. I got in my car in Maryland, drove up there, not having his address. And I thought, I'm going to find him and I'm going to say hi and I'm going to shake his hand. And I did.
Wow.
And the people in town were not that helpful because they figure, who's this guy? He's just going to bother this wonderful but elderly icon. And I managed to get some kid cutting a lawn to fess up and say, well, I probably shouldn't tell you, but if you go down the end of the street, make a right, you'll see the red studio back there. And I was there with my soon to be wife. So we walked down the driveway. We were intercepted by this man who was in his 50s. Of course, when you're in your 20s, this older guy,
Yeah.
50 looks pretty good right now. But
Yeah.
and the guy stopped us and said, well, Mr. Rockwell's been traveling. I'm really sorry. So great of you to come up, but I really can't. And fortunately, I read the book and I took a guess and I said, are you Louis Lamoni? And he said, well, yes, I am. And I turned to my wife and said, oh my God, this is Louis Lamoni. In 1954, he lived in Lenox, which is just right next to Stockbridge. And he's looking at me like, and I said he worked for the gas and electric company, but he was an amateur photographer. And Mr. Rockwell's photographer was sick at the time, dealing with something. And he asked Louis Lamoni to come and take pictures. I said, I guess you're still doing that. And he says, well, yes, I am. And so he said, well, okay, look, you went to all the trouble to come up here. Let me go see, but no promises. The next thing you know, we're in the studio for the better part of an hour with Norman Rockwell. He gave us the complete tour of it, and I even knew what things were before I said, that's the Balopticon projector you got there. And he says, yeah. I said, you still use it? He says, sure I do. And I turned to my wife and explained what it was, and he's like, oh wow, this guy knows all about me. It's pretty
That's
cool.
cool. That's really cool. When I was in my 20s and we used to sit in the coffee shop and smoke endless cigarettes and have coffee together, we were going to come up with 5 questions and drive up to Cape Cod and go to Kurt Vonnegut's doorstep.
Oh, oh,
That
that's so great.
it's wild that you say that because we were literally, I don't know if we'd read his story or got it, but I remember one of my friends who was a diehard Vonnegut fan was like, let's come up with the 5 best questions and we're just going to drive up there.
We're
And
going
we
to
never
road
did it.
trip this thing.
Yeah, but it would have been cool.
Well, I tell that story, and I fortunately have a few pictures from when it happened and stuff, to kind of document it. But I tell that story to people, usually younger people, to say that, okay, why did that happen? Like, why did that work out?
Yeah.
Well, to begin with, I had a passion for what I was about to try to do. Once I read that book, I thought, oh my God. I mean, the book was very revealing. It wasn't just I painted this and I painted that, and this is where I get my brushes. I mean, it goes back to bad behavior when he was married to this woman, and there were swingers. I mean, you can't picture that with Norman Rockwell.
Yeah.
All kinds of twists and turns, and this one wife died. What am I going to do now? And he was kind of getting full of himself, so he was kind of like showing up late for work and stuff. He was kind of a mess for a while. But anyway, I had the passion, but I did the homework, and then I went ahead and walked off the end of the pier and got in the car and went.
That's
Drove
it.
up there, and then I have to say, I guess, sort of talked my way in. But if I don't read the book, I don't know Louis Lamoni. And I
Yeah.
didn't have a picture of him. I
Yeah.
wasn't guessing against the picture.
Yeah.
So
That's amazing. That's such a great story. So let me ask you this. Let's get into the book. Let's get into your podcast.
sure.
Um, when dating hurts, kind of give me a little bit of the timeline. It is definitely your passion and you're bringing a lot of awareness. So
Yes.
let's open the story up.
Sure. Well, so in 2014, I was married with 2 kids. My daughter was 21. My son was 4 years younger. She is at that point when the story really gets started, she is graduating from St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. It's May 14th, 2005. So my wife, my son, and I drive up there, and it's just great. I mean, it's this wonderful sunny day, a little hotter than you expect in May. And we go through this. She graduates under the big white tent. She looks great. I'd never seen her look more radiant, more with it, happier. She was ready to be out of college. She had a sales associate job lined up with General Mills, which was the job all the kids in food marketing wanted to get. She actually won the job. So that was great. And in the midst of saying hi and hugging her after the graduation, she introduced us to her then boyfriend, this guy she'd been dating about 5 months. And he, I created a name for him, which was Nick. It's not his real name, but I thought I need to tell a story. I don't need to bring a lawsuit if I could help it. So
Yeah.
that's why I had various reasons for giving him Nick as the name. But so anyway, met him, shook his hand, and at the moment I met him, the only time in my life I've ever had something like this happen, I shook his hand and I thought, wow, I'd never want to tangle with this guy. I
Yeah.
actually pictured myself fighting with this guy. Now, my daughter was 21, this guy was 28. And I don't think it's because of that. It's just more of something. It was a vibe. It was just really strange. But anyway, we took pictures. So I got pictures of this guy and my daughter, Kristin, and he took pictures of the four of us. And so anyway, we go through all that and we're going to go out to eat with her afterwards in Philadelphia itself. And I said something because he looked a little miserable about something, but I didn't know why. I said something to Kristen about, well, do you think he wants to come with us? And she said, nah, look, I'll see him later on. Let's just make it the four of us, the original four of us. So that's what we did, and that was that. But that's the day I met him, which was the last day I ever saw my daughter alive. Because 20 days later, in her apartment, he stabbed her to death. And the backstory seems to be that she was breaking up with him at that time. And obviously, it went horribly. So that's the kind of, that's the spark of the story that sent us all on a different path in this family.
Yeah, and that's unimaginable to lose a child, especially in that way. But you had a sense though going into it. You had just an intuitive sense that something was wrong.
I had something, but I didn't pursue it.
Right. Yeah. And it was the
I didn't.
first time you met him.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm one of these people that when something like that happens, when I have a thought like that, my next thought is, why do you have thoughts like that? It's like more like what's wrong with me,
Right.
more than what's wrong with him. So, but yeah, I didn't pursue it. I say that because had I pursued it, and I did have a little moment there, that was a Saturday. On 2 days later, on Monday, I was looking through the pictures that were taken that day, and the way the sun went across his face in one of them, you could see a scar under one of his eyes and maybe one on his forehead. And it wasn't horrible. It wasn't like he was disfigured, but I looked at it and a guy I work with was in my office and I said, hey, what do you make of this? He said, he looks like, I don't know. He says, it looks like maybe he was in a fight at some time, which was another opportunity to pay attention. Now, with the wisdom of time and all of it too late, I would have done a background check on that guy. You spend $50, go on various websites, you'll find out a whole heck of a lot of stuff. I would have found out that he had a pretty nasty past. Maybe you can edit that. He had a pretty nasty past.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And yeah, I mean, he had actually done time in prison. So
So where's he at now?
he's in prison right now. So the deal is this that he 20 days after the graduation, he murdered my daughter in her apartment. He stabbed her to death. Later that day, not too much later that day, though, when he was in a hospital checking himself into an emergency room because of injuries he had, that's when the people at the hospital alerted the local police, who then grabbed him. Now, it was determined by the medical examiner, the same medical examiner who examined my deceased daughter, also examined him. And this medical examiner determined that his looked exactly like self inflicted wounds. So then you say, why? And the answer is so that he could try to pull off some kind of a defense scenario. She attacked me and I had to fight her off, so that's what he did. So anyway, that day he was taken into jail and he was in jail until the following April when he was finally And then he went to a state prison. So he went from a county prison to a state prison. He actually pled guilty, is what happened. And he received 15 to 30 years with this plea. And so if you do the math, 2005 plus 15, we've been doing, or there have been parole reviews in in 2020, 2021, and 2022, and they're still hanging on to them. These are annual reviews, so you can imagine having to do a parole review every year.
Yeah.
Is You get to relive the whole thing, so it's tough.
Yeah. I mean, it would, yeah. So how have how have you mustered the strength throughout the years to keep yourself at a place where you can stay sane and then also be an advocate, which you're clearly doing as well?
So what happened was somewhere this thought came to me the night that I heard about it, which was June 3rd, 2005. After I received word from local police, they put me on the phone with Philadelphia police detectives. They told me what they knew at that time, which is not everything, but quite a lot, quite frankly. And somewhere that evening, once I had told my parents who came to the house, and once I talked about this with my wife and son, this thought occurred to me, which was, I don't know where this is all going to go eventually, but somewhere in the midst of this, I know there's going to be a huge responsibility about how we handle it, but somewhere down the road, there may be some opportunity about all this too. I had no idea what that was going to be, but I just had some other intuition about that this will, whether we want it or not, we're stuck, and we're going to be in a position where new things will come our way that we never expected, whether you want them or not. Not new in a good sense, just like, wow, we've never done this before. The responsibility part was really that I felt immediately that the way we carry ourselves is going to mean everything, because people will look at you and wonder if you're going to crumble and fall apart on the ground, or are you going to go into your cave and roll a rock over the front of it. There were people I work with who thought I'd quit my job, or it's like, really, you think I'm going to quit my job?
Yeah.
But it's an off ramp to a place you've never been. And the opportunity eventually was, or started. We were still in the midst of dealing with whether he's going to prison or not. It was pretty obvious he would, but we were asked to speak at a memorial service about 5 months after Kristin was killed. And so my son wrote something, got up and spoke for 5 or 10 minutes. My wife did, and I did. And I also made a video, which I could do. I was in advertising and I was a creative guy, so I knew how to do things like that. But we got up and we did our thing. And when we spoke, that whole place was quiet. And when it was all over, uh, so many people indicated then and afterwards through emails about what it meant to them, how much they learned from what we already had learned about domestic violence, dating violence, the warning signs of an unhealthy relationship, which Kristin had swirling around her, but didn't know how to interpret. So, just the fact that it had such an impact, just getting up and speaking, made me think somewhere I really want to do more of this. So we were encouraged to get up and speak at different groups. And then over the years, I mean, I spoke at Ravens Stadium in Baltimore, and there's 956 people there. They told me when I walked through the door. It was a domestic violence annual luncheon that they did, fundraiser. Had all kinds of, so, over the years, just being able to grab an audience, get their attention, talk about the prevalence of dating and domestic violence, changing people's lives, quite frankly. I mean, just so those things were all happening. And somewhere along the line, I thought that maybe I'd write some articles and put them on LinkedIn, just about a parent's worst nightmare. How do you deal with the parent's worst nightmare, or how do you prevent one, more importantly? And after I did 11 or 12 of those, someone wrote to me just a little comment afterwards that said, "This is all very beautifully written, but why don't you stop writing these articles and why don't you go write the book?" And I thought, I had never thought about writing a book, but I thought, I think I can do it. So at the end of 2015, now this is 10 years after, and I just hadn't thought of writing a book. So it's not like I put it off. I just hadn't really thought about the commitment. How are you going to get this thing published? Are you going to self publish? Are you going to go chase down an agent? How's that going to work? And I just decided, well, why don't you just start writing it and we'll figure out how it's going to be ink meeting paper sometime down the road. So I did. And I took about 4 years to write it. And, it wasn't a daily thing. It wasn't like that at all. But as the more I went and the more I showed parts of it to people, the more I thought this really could work. People really were wrapped in this book. So then in 2020, I was going to put it out beginning of the year. COVID came along, and I thought no one's going to want to pick up this book or think about anything like that right now. They're preoccupied with COVID and pandemic and what's going on here. And so I put it out at the end of April of 2020. And so yeah, it's self-published as it turns out. I just decided at some point I'm not going to keep writing query letters to agents. And then once that happens, the agents then would go sniffing around and try to find a publishing house. And then I know I'm going to get an editor who's going to want me to, they're going to run red ink all over it and make me change huge parts of it. By the way, others probably won't be able to see this, but I can show it to
Yeah.
you.
Oh yeah.
Here's the actual book.
Yeah.
And by the way, for you, that picture on the back was the graduation day.
I've looked through the pictures. Yeah.
And that was taken by the guy who killed my daughter 20 days later, that picture.
So if anyone out there wants to pick this book up, if they want to listen to your podcast, you've done an amazing job of really encapsulating a lot of parts of getting to the essence of your story. Where's the
Thank
best
you.
place for people to go that want to delve in more?
Well, if they don't want to write down a whole lot while we're talking, they should go to whendatinghurts.com. That's my website. Now, if they just want to not go there, although you'll see links there to get to the book, if they just want to get the book, go to Amazon. And the book is called whendatinghurts.com by Bill Mitchell. And the podcast, which was started about a year after the book came out, is also called whendatinghurts.com. And I'm happy to report it's been out just over 3 years. And somewhere in the next month or two, it'll hit 1 million downloads, which I would never have dreamed of all those zeros and commas. But yeah, it's gathered quite an audience.
Did you ever watch the show Monk?
Sure. Oh my God, yes.
Did you see the movie that just came out?
No,
Okay.
no.
It's interesting because, he's a germ freak. So it's like, he's like, COVID. He's all happy. Everything's antiseptic and all that. But there's a point, and I don't want to give too much away, but I think this is a part of what you're doing, where he gets really down about why am I doing this?
Hmm.
Like, really, why am I doing this?
You
It's
mean why
really
am I
hard.
being a detective? Is
Yeah,
that
it's really
okay?
hard. I don't
Right.
see the benefits. I'm not seeing it. And at one point, all of these people that were kind of ghosts come up and say, you saved me and you did this and you did that. And it was pretty heart-wrenching. And I think about what you're doing, and I think there's a part of all of this that you're not going to understand what your work is going to do to save lives. And ultimately, at the end of the day, how that's going to be a beacon that's going to be sent out into the universe forever.
Yeah, I'm a little choked up right now, but that's true.
you know and yeah, so anyways, that's the sense that I get out of all of this, is that there's so much good. I'm glad that we had the chance to talk a little bit about art. I know this is heavy, so it's good to kind of weave a tapestry of who you are, and where you come from, and just it's just unimaginable to go through this. But as far as I'm concerned, the work you're doing right now is seminal, and I appreciate you taking a minute out, because I'm sure revisiting this all the time can have its own bards and can be a difficult thing to do. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, I once in a while when I think of when I think of what happened to my daughter, and when I really think about it, picture it, put myself in that space, I really get hit hard.
Yeah.
So I usually keep what happened to her is what I keep it on the surface a bit.
Hmm.
personally. I might talk about it, but I'm talking about it like I'm just reciting facts about stuff. When I really think about anybody, somebody as wonderful, gentle, innocent as she was, peaceful person, stabbed 55 times by some monster in her apartment, and then left, he estimated, for 45 minutes while she was struggling to breathe. And he just sat in the chair figuring out what he would do next. Like, where do I go from here? You know, eventually she dies. He gets a shower. He gets on different clothes. He calls up his brother and his sister, and they say, well, if you have all these injuries, you should get to a hospital. And that's why he went there. When I think about all of that, when I think about walking into her apartment, which I did a week and a half later, to actually be in the space, to stand in the place where she was when she died, where that happened, that'll really that'll put me out for a bit.
Yeah.
However, like you said, when I think about all the good that can come now, I can't have her back, but what the question will always be, what can I have?
Yeah.
I always say, what's behind door number 2 or 3? So do I think we've saved some lives? Heck, I don't know. Maybe. I mean, that's a big statement. I know doctors save lives, various people save lives, law enforcement saves lives. I suppose that the let's just say maybe the messages that we put out over the course of all this time have probably, let's say, improved some lives. I'll go
Yeah.
that far.
Yeah.
Saved, very possibly.
Yeah.
I've had people come out and tell me directly, your story, your daughter's story saved my daughter's life. So the fact that I helped channel that story, served it up in different ways, I'll take credit for that part of it. I think the story impacts people. My daughter was not the stereotypical domestic violence victim. If and what is that? I mean, people usually see that in certain parts of town, maybe the toughest parts of town. They might picture certain races, let's say. She works against all that stuff. I mean, she was a very pretty blonde haired girl who went all the way through college, graduated, and had a job lineup with General Mills. I mean, come on. This talk about Norman Rockwell and people like that. This is steps right out of one of his paintings, her life at that point. The fact of the matter is that 1 in 3 women will suffer serious physical harm at the hands of an intimate partner in their lifetime. And it typically happens between the ages of 16 and 24, but can happen to any woman at any age. So I've talked with 12-year-olds who've been beat up by boyfriends, and I've talked with people who are pushing 80 who have had 40 or 50 years of being married to some guy who, when he loses it, takes it out on them. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you opening up your story and giving it your time today. Best of luck with everything. Keep on staying strong out there.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I appreciate it.